The intake log for Careth Station, day 1047 of my posting, reads 14 passengers processed, no anomalies, no holds. That is what the log says. The log is wrong. I have kept the log wrong on purpose. I will explain why. My name is Cassian. I am or was before everything. Warden 3rd aboard a Class D medical way station in the outer fringe of the Aurelian Transit Corridor, which is a bureaucratic way of saying I ran the front desk of a clinic that nobody chose to visit. Careth Station orbits a brown dwarf called Thresh 9 on no map that anyone important keeps current. It is cold, it is brown, and it gives off just enough heat to keep us from rationing air. We are not on any shipping lane. We are on the lane, beside the shipping lane, which means we see medical transports that have run out of closer options and survey, crews with mineral claims nobody else believes in, and, occasionally, refugee transit terms papers have been stamped wrong, or lost, or never existed. I have been at postings like this most of my adult life. The Casarin frontier before this was 11 years, and before that a year and a half aboard a mobile surgical unit that serviced 3 systems on rotating contract, and at the standard training on Careth Station that every licensed field surgeon completes before they are considered fit to run a table supervision. I did not grow up imagining this kind of life. I grew up on Vareth Prime, which is a settled world, with weather and public transit and a functioning hospital system, and I trained expecting to work in a functioning hospital system. What actually happened is that I was good at the kind of field work that takes you far from functioning hospital systems, and found over time that the farther out I went the better the fit. I am not certain this reflects well on me. It reflects accurately on me, which is a different thing. I am 51 years old now. On the day in question I was 44, and I had been at Careth Station for 3 years, which followed 11 years on the Casaran frontier, which followed a marriage that ended quietly and a life that reconfigured itself around the work because the work was reliable in a way that other things were not. I am a large man, heavy-set, with a scar that runs from my left temple to the corner of my jaw from a shrapnel fragment I never had properly removed because there was always someone else on the table first. My hands are steady. That is the only remarkable thing about me. I was not aware, on day 1147, that it was remarkable at all. The transport came in at 3:04, which is the hour that makes everyone look bad. It was a Lethric-class mid-range medical hauler. Registry out of Voreth Station 4 systems over. Its manifest listed 16 passengers, 12 listed as crew and 4 as passengers in transit, plus a physician of record named Aishan Vor, who I never spoke to, because she communicated exclusively through the ship's relay and answered every question with the phrase, per standard transfer, call. I've known enough ship's physicians to know that phrase means they want the station to process the paperwork without asking anything about the paperwork. I processed the paperwork. The first 13 passengers came through intake in groups. I ran the standard battery, vitals, bloodline compatibility code, pathogen screen, origin world registry confirmation. This small you run compatibility codes, not because you expect to find anything, but because 3 centuries ago, the Aurelian Medical Compact made it a condition of way station licensing after an outbreak of a hemorrhagic fever that passed undetected through 11 stations, because nobody checked. The compatibility scan is the equivalent of asking a traveler to sign a guest book. It takes 4 seconds, produces a 5-character alphanumeric. You log it and move on. I had run the scan approximately 12,000 times in my career. I say approximately because I stopped counting after the first few years on the frontier, when I understood that the scan was not going to be interesting. The scan was a formality, an administrative gesture, checkbox on a licensing form, drafted by bureaucrats in the Compact's central office who had never worked a Class D station, and whose understanding way station medicine was theoretical at best. I ran the scan because not running it was a licensing violation, and because I follow procedures even when I do not believe in them, which is a habit I developed on the frontier, and which has kept me and my patients alive. On several occasions when my own judgment would have been wrong. None of this is to say I was not paying attention on the night of day 1147. I was always paying attention. Paying attention is what you do when you work alone at an intake desk at 0340. The 14th passenger came through alone. She had listed herself on the manifest as Davor, a name so stripped and angular that I remember thinking it sounded like a name someone had assembled from the parts of a longer name, which is exactly what it was. Her transit papers listed her origin world as Velith Station, is a relay hub rather than a planet, and the kind of listed origin that signals either that you change ships frequently or that you don't want anyone running backward along your route. Her stated purpose was medical observation, ongoing. Occupation was listed as administrative consultant. She sat down in the intake chair and I ran the battery. Her vitals were slightly wrong. Not wrong enough to flag for illness. Her respiratory rate was 14 instead of 16. Cardiac output was a shade low for her apparent body mass, but wrong in the way that vitals are sometimes wrong when a species is under a specific kind of sustained pressure. I have seen it in patients who have not slept in 72 hours. I have seen it in patients who are carrying something that has nothing to do with medicine. I noted it and said nothing because it was not my business, and because the intake chair is not a confession box. She sat with her spine very straight, and her hands folded in her lap, in a way that I have since learned is specific to formal Aurelian court training, a particular neutrality of posture that is taught to members of the royal household as a baseline, the way the rest of us are taught to make eye contact without staring. Her skin was the color of warm ash, a gray with undertone in it, and she wore her hair in close-cropped copper-dark braids that were practical, and also, I thought, recently made less ornate than they had been, as though something had been removed from them. Her eyes were pale amber with silver in the iris, and they watched the intake scanner with the attention of someone who had calculated the risk of this particular moment ahead of time and decided it was acceptable. I ran the compatibility code. The scanner took 4 seconds on the first 13 passengers. On her, it took 4 seconds, stopped, and then did something I had never seen it do in 3 years at Carith Station, and 11 years of frontier field work before that. It ran again. I looked at the screen. The screenshot that showed a rotating symbol I did not recognize. A slow green helix that I later identified as the station's dormant, Royal Bloodline Concordance sub-protocol, a legacy function built into every Aurelian licensed medical scanner in the corridor as a condition of the original compact treaty designed to run automatically if a genetic sequence in the scanner's database matched a specific set of markers. The sub-protocol had not been triggered at Carith Station before. It had not, to the best of anyone's records, been triggered at any way station in the outer corridor in living memory. The last logged activation in the Compact's central registry, I looked this up later, was 41 years ago at a station 6 systems from here, and the station's intake officer at the time had manually overridden it and followed it as a scanner error, which it was not, and the consequences of that override are a different story. I watched the helix rotate for approximately 6 seconds. 6 seconds is not a long time. It was long enough for me to be aware that the woman across the desk had gone very still in the way that a person goes still when they are managing a response rather than not having one. Controlled breathing, hands slightly tighter in her lap, eyes fixed on the readout with a focus that was not casual. She had been watching the scanner since she sat down. I had been watching her watch it. I looked up. She looked at me. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then the screen completed its readout. I will not reproduce the full code here. What it showed, in the plain language summary field, that the sub-protocol generates for the benefit of intake officers who are not geneticists, was the following: Aurelian Royal Bloodline Concordance. Active sequence detected cross-reference. Carith Station Warden 3rd. Intake log. Current session match category. Primary consort register. Classification Delta 1 bloodline status. Sovereign pairing eligible. Standing Protocol 7, I read it twice. The second reading did not make it more comprehensible than the first. My name, Vutsi, Warden 3rd, was in the cross-reference field, which is a field that had never contained a name in my experience. My genetic code was in the match column. The summary field used the word sovereign twice and the word match 3 times. I looked up. I think, I said, that I need to understand what this means before we go any further. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "It means the scanner found something that shouldn't exist." Her voice was low and precise, not an accent I could place from the outer corridor. Something older than that, something that had been trained out of regional inflection, and then trained back into a version of itself that was chosen rather than inherited. I had heard voices like that once or twice in my frontier years, when someone of significant rank moved through a forward post without their retinue, and tried to sound like everyone else and did not quite manage it. "Shouldn't exist," I said. The Aurelian Royal Consort Register was destroyed in the Relith burning 312 years ago, she said. The burning was not an accident. It was conducted by faction within the court that believed eliminating the genetic register would eliminate the legal mechanism for a sovereignty challenge. They were correct that it would do that. They did not consider that it would also eliminate the mechanism by which the reigning sovereign could complete the bonding compact under Aurelian succession law. I said nothing. I was still reading the screen. 3 centuries ago, she continued, in the same tone she might have used to explain a transit delay. The last queen sovereign of the Aurelian compact, who had a completed compact predecessor 6 steps removed, entered the succession with a stability that has not existed since. Every queen after her has ruled under a form of provisional authority that the court accepts because the alternative is disorder, but that creates a specific kind of vulnerability that the court has spent 3 centuries pretending does not exist. Because they burned the register, I said. Yes, and this scanner, I said, is suggesting that the concordance protocol was designed at the same time as the bonding compact, she said. It runs against the scan database rather than the destroyed register. The compact's framers were cautious people. They did not trust that the register would survive. They encoded the matching criteria directly into the scanner architecture across the entire license corridor so that if the register were ever lost, the criteria could still be run against the living population. She paused. No one has found a match in 312 years. I looked at the screen again. My name was still in the cross-reference field. It had not left. It was not going to leave. "I'm a frontier medic," I said. "I ran intake desks and I pulled shrapnel, and I set broken limbs on the Kasserine frontier for 11 years, and now I run the intake desk here, in any court. I'm not in any registry. I don't have." I stopped because I didn't know how to finish that sentence in a way that was accurate. "Don't have anything to do with Aurelian sovereignty." "Your maternal great-great-grandmother," she said, "was Esivith Voth, registered citizen of Kasserine Station 47 years ago. Before she settled on Kasserine Station, she spent 20 years as a bonded agricultural worker on the Aurelian Outer Ring, which is a class of labor that was, until 80 years ago, registered in the Aurelian population database under their genetic codes for medical purposes. The codes were never expunged. The concordance protocol found hers. I sat with that. "A great-great-grandmother," I said. "The match is not about proximity of the line," she said. It is about the survival of a specific sequence. The sequence persists regardless of generation. Your great-great-grandmother carried it without any legal significance because she was not in the register. But she carried it, and it passed, and you have it, and the concordance found it." I looked at her. She looked at me. For the first time since she had sat down, the very precise neutrality of her posture had relaxed by something that was not quite a fraction. It was more like a breath she had decided to take, rather than one she had calculated. I said, "You came through here specifically." "I have been traveling the outer corridor for 14 months, she said. "Kareth Station is the 47th way station I have passed through. The scanner has not activated before now. 14 months, 47 way stations." I thought about the name stripped down to 2 blunt syllables. I thought about the transit papers, routing through Velith Station. I thought about the ship's physician who answered every question with standard transfer protocol, which I now understood was the answer of someone who had been hired to protect a traveling queen and knew better than to volunteer information to an intake officer at a way station that had no idea what was happening. I thought about what it would take to sustain that. 14 months, 47 intake chairs, 47 scanner cycles. that came back empty. And what you would have to be carrying to keep going after the 46th. You didn't know I'd be here, I said. No one can know, she said. That is the nature of the search. You look until you find. There was a quality to the last 4 words that I did not know how to name at the time. I know it better now. It was the tone of someone who had rehearsed a long patience, and had reached the moment the patience was for, and was not entirely certain what to do. Shh. Now that they were in it. I turned the intake screen slightly so she could see it, even though she had been watching it from the beginning. Does Standing Protocol 7 mean? I said. It means the match meets the criteria for a formal bonding compact under Aurelian succession law, she said. It means that if both parties consent, the compact can be completed using the concordance protocol as the legal basis in place of the destroyed register. She did not look away from the screen. It is a provision that has never been invoked because no match has ever been found. The provision's existence is known only to the court's succession scholars, most of whom believe it is a theoretical protection against a scenario that will never occur. And now, I said, and now. I got up from the intake desk and walked to the small window at the back of the bay. Carith Station's outer ring viewport shows Thresh 9 on most orbits. A brown disk against black, lightless in any way a human eye registers as warmth. Enormous and patient in the way that things are when they have existed for a very long time. I had stood at that window perhaps 1,000 times in 3 years. It is not a beautiful view. It is an honest one. I stood there for a moment. I was not thinking about sovereignty or bloodlines or 3-century-old succession crises. I was thinking about a woman who had traveled 14 months and 47 waystations and filed her name as 2 syllables and sat down in an intake chair and watched a scanner run without showing what it would cost her if it failed again. I turned around. You said if both parties consent. I said, yes. What would it mean for you, the compact? She was quiet for a moment. When she answered, it was not in the tone she had used for the rest of it. The precise, even tone of someone delivering a legal briefing to a stranger. It was quieter. The provisional authority ends, she said. The court loses the vulnerability it has used against every queen since the burning. The succession line stabilizes for the first time in 300 years. There are specific court factions, old factions, well-resourced ones, who have built their positions entirely on the managed uncertainty of the current arrangement. Those factions would lose the instrument they have used for 3 centuries to limit sovereign authority. She paused. They are not people who would accept that quietly. I see, I said. It would not be a simple life, she said. What it would ask of you is not simple, and I am not going to describe it as such. You would be entering a court that has not had a consort in 300 years, that contains factions that would prefer to continue not having one, and your claim would be contested in ways that would require patience and steadiness, and a willingness to hold a position under pressure. She looked at me directly. I am not offering you a ceremonial role. I am telling you what the concordance found, and what it means under the law, and I am giving you the door. She did not gesture toward the door. She didn't need to. I looked at her for a moment. I thought about what she had described. Patience and steadiness, and willingness to hold a position under pressure, and thought that those were a reasonable summary of the requirements of a frontier intake desk, and that I had been meeting them for 14 years. Can I ask you something? I said. She nodded. The 46 waystations before this one, when the scanner didn't activate. What did that feel like? She was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that is not evasion but is gathering. Like standing in a room where something should be, she said, and it isn't. I knew that feeling. I had known it in the years after my marriage ended, and before the frontier work gave me a shape to put myself into. It was the feeling of a specific absence that you learn to carry because the alternative is not moving, and you have to keep moving. I came back to the intake desk and sat down. The bonding compact, I said. Walk me through what it actually requires. The succession implications. The compact itself. Something shifted in her face. It was not a large shift. It was the kind of shift that happens in the face of a person who has been maintaining a very specific presentation and has just registered that the presentation can be released slightly because the person in front of them is not going to use it against them. A formal declaration before a legal witness, she said. In the absence of the original register, the concordant protocol itself functions as witness. The station's scanner records the match. The parties state their consent to the compact. Protocol logs it. No ceremony is required. No court is required. The compact has legal standing the moment both parties spoken and the log is sealed. And the declaration, is there a specific form? There is a traditional form, she said. It has been carried in the succession scholar's records since before the burning. It is not long. She looked at me. You don't have to know it. I know it for both of us. I looked at the scanner. The helix was still rotating. The protocol had opened and was waiting, in the way that old legal mechanisms wait, patient and indifferent to the drama of the people standing in front of them. I thought about the intake log. 14 passengers, no anomalies, no holds. I thought about the fact I could close the protocol, log it as a scanner error the way the intake officer 41 years ago had done, and no one would ever know. The transport would leave in the morning. The woman who called herself Dav Orr would go back to 47 waystations of empty scanner cycles, and a court running on managed uncertainty, and a provisional authority that would outlast her if she let it. And I would go back to the intake desk for day 148, and the day after that, and the day after that, which would look exactly like this day had looked before 0340. I have thought since about why I did not do that. I want to be honest about it, because the version of this story that courts tend to tell, the version that shows up in the formal record, and in the historians' accounts that were written after everything is settled, is about bloodlines and succession mechanics and the legal architecture of the bonding compact, as though what happened in that gray bay at 0340 was a procedural event with a procedural outcome. That version is accurate. It is not complete. The honest version is simpler. I am a man who was trained to stay at the table when leaving would be easier. I stayed on the Kasserine frontier for 11 years, because there were always people on the table and nobody else to run the table. Stayed at Careth Station when my contract was up the first time, because the posting needed filling, and I was there, and someone had to be. Staying is not heroism. It is a habit, and like all habits, it is partly a character trait, and partly the accumulated weight of every previous time you made the same choice. The woman across the desk had been making the same choice for 14 months. 47 intake chairs, 47 scanner cycles. Every time the helix didn't run, she filed her false transit papers and boarded the next transport. You don't do that because it's easy. You do it because you have decided that the thing you're looking for is worth the looking, regardless of whether you find it. I understood that. I understood it the way you understand the thing that is also true of yourself. Say the traditional form, I said. She looked at me. For the first time since she had walked into the bay, her composure cracked, not into distress, into something that was less managed. Her eyes, which had been amber silver and precisely watchful, the same color but different in the way that a room is different when the light in it changes. She spoke the form. I will not reproduce it here either. It is in the compact's records now, logged against the concordance protocol, sealed in Careth Station's intake registry under the entry for day 147. What I can tell you is that it was short and it was old, and it had the quality of language that has survived a long time, because it says a necessary thing without saying too much around it. Oaths tend to be like that when they're real. She finished. She looked at me. I said, I consent. The scanner chimed once. The helix stopped rotating. A new entry appeared in the summary field. Bonding compact. Lodge concordance protocol sealed. Day 147, Careth Station witness. Royal Bloodline Concordance Protocol 7 status. Compact valid under Aurelian Succession Code, Article 3, Section 9. I looked at it for a moment. Then I opened the intake log and wrote, Teen passengers processed, 1 hold for extended compatibility review, cleared at 0502. That's not entirely accurate, she said. No, I said. It's what the log should say. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You understand what you've done. I understand what the scanner says I've done, I said. I understand what you told me it means. The rest of it, the court, the factions, the what comes next. I'll understand that when I get there. You may get there sooner than you expect, she said. When I return to the compact and file the concordance record, the succession scholars will know within hours. The factions will know within days. How long does it take you to get back to the compact from here? 22 days on the transport I came in on. Then I have 22 days to figure out what I'm doing. I said. There was a pause. You could come on the transport, she said. The way she said it was careful. The same care she had used when she told me about the door. She was not assuming. She was not presuming. She was offering. I looked at the intake desk. I looked at the scanner, which was back to showing its idle screen, ordinary and indifferent, as though the last hour had not happened. I thought about day 148. I thought about the brown dwarf outside the viewport, patient and enormous and lightless. I'd need to file a leave of absence, I said, and find someone to cover intake. I can wait until morning. Posting officer who covers my absences is asleep right now, I said. She'll be irritable about being woken. I have waited 14 months, she said. I can wait until your posting officer is awake. There was something in the way she said it that was not quite a smile, not even close to a smile, in any conventional sense. But was the thing that exists in the space where smile could be if the person were someone who allowed themselves that. I had the feeling, sitting across the intake desk from her at Eero 502, in a gray bay above a brown dwarf, that she was not someone who allowed herself that often. I had the feeling that it was not a deficiency in her, but a thing that had been trained away, along with the regional inflections and the ornaments in the braids. I thought, that seems like a waste, I said. When we get to the compact, when the court sees the concordance record, is there a moment? A specific moment when it becomes official. There is a formal acknowledgement ceremony, she said. The court gathers. The concordance record is presented. The compact is read into the succession register. She paused. It will be the first time in 300 years that ceremony has been performed, and I stand at the front of it. Yes, with you. Yes, I considered the intake desk one more time. I considered the shrapnel scar that I had never had removed because there was always someone else on the table first, and how that single fact was probably the most honest summary of my adult life that I could offer. Then I considered a woman who had traveled 47 waystations and sat down in my intake chair and handed me a door she was hoping I wouldn't take. I got up and walked to the supply cabinet and took out the standard departure prep forms. Tell me her name, I said. Your posting physician. Fill out her covering authority so you don't have to wait for her to find the forms. She told me. I filled them out. While I wrote, she sat in the intake chair with her spine straight and her hands in her lap, which is court training. But she had stopped watching the scanner and was watching me instead, which is something else. At 0611, I woke the posting officer, was irritable about it. By 0700 the forms were signed. By 0730 I had packed what I owned into 2 cases, which did not take long, because the things that mattered to me were not numerous. A medical kit that I maintained out of habit, though my license had lapsed for the kind of serious work it was stocked for. 3 books, actual printed ones, which I carried because screens are fine and books are better for the kind of reading you do when you are trying to think rather than to be occupied. A photograph of my mother and my grandmother together on Vareth Prime, taken before I was born, both of them squinting into a sun I have never stood under. A spare uniform and enough clothes for 3 weeks is always enough. Because if you are somewhere longer than 3 weeks, you either acquire things or you learn to make do. I met her at the transport dock at 0745. She was standing at the boarding seal in a coat that was plainer than anything she was probably used to. Wearing, with her copper dark braids and her amber silver eyes on, and the particular posture of one who is arrived where they had been going and was not sure yet what to do with the fact of it. I set my cases down, I said. I have a question I should have asked in the bay. She waited. What do I call you? I said. Not the transit name, the real one. She looked at me for a moment. Draveth, she said. That is what I am called by the people who know me. Draveth, I said. Yes, I'm Cassian. I know, she said. It was in the intake log. The transport's boarding seal opened. She walked through first. She had 300 years of precedent behind her, and I did not think this was the right moment to argue about it. I picked up my cases and followed. The brown dwarf fell away behind us as we cleared the station. I looked at it through the transport's aft viewport until it was a small brown disk, and then a point of dark warmth, and then nothing. I did not look back at the station itself. The intake desk would be fine. The log said, 15 passengers, 1 extended hold, cleared at 0502. No anomalies. No holds outstanding. That part, at least, was accurate. There are things I could tell you about the 22 days on that transport that I won't, because they are ours and not the story's. I will tell you that she slept, finally, on the second day, a long, unglamorous sleep in the transport's secondary bunk that I did not disturb. And that her vitals when she woke were 16 and not 14, and that I noted this without saying anything about it because the intake desk is not a confession box, and neither is a transport bunk. I will tell you that she asked me, on the 4th day, how I had gotten the scar, and I told her the full version takes longer than you'd think. Because the shrapnel was the last part of a longer day on the frontier, she listened the way she listened to everything. Fully, without filling the silence before I was finished. I will tell you that on the 6th day I asked her, in return, what it had been like to do the work she did, to maintain a court's governance for years, under a provisional status that the court itself had never openly acknowledged. And she answered that question without the briefing room voice. Plainly, the way you answer something when you've thought about it for a long time and have not been asked before. I will tell you that she laughed once, on the 8th day, at something I said about survey crews with implausible mineral claims, a thing I had not meant as a joke, and that it was not a performed laugh, that the space in her face where a smile could be was very clearly a smile. On the 10th day, she said, the court will not be uniformly welcoming. I assumed, I said, there is a faction called the Compact Conservancy. They have held their current position in the advisory structure for 60 years, part because the provisional status of the sovereign authority gives them an argument for an expanded advisory role, a structural compensation, in their framing for the succession vulnerability. The concordance record eliminates that argument, and they'll contest the record. They will attempt to, she said. The legal basis is solid. The concordance protocol is not disputable in succession court. It was designed specifically to be unchallengeable, because the framers understood that any mechanism that could be challenged would eventually be challenged. The Conservancy will make procedural arguments and file delays and request independent verification of the scanner logs. None of it will succeed, but it will take time and patience. I thought about 11 years on the Kasserine frontier, where every supply request and every transfer of care and every authorization for treatment beyond the standard protocol involved a chain of procedural steps designed by people who had never been in a forward post and who seemed to believe that documentation was the same thing as medical care. I have experience with procedural delays, I said. She looked at me. Yes, she said. I believe you do. The court was waiting when we arrived. The factions were not pleased. That part of the story is longer and harder and has more moving pieces than an intake log can contain, and most of it is not mine to tell. It is the Compact's history now, and the historians who write it will have better records than I do, and more patience for the specific texture of court politics is a texture I have learned to navigate without ever coming to find it interesting. What I will tell you is this. The concordance record was sealed. The compact was valid. The first acknowledgement ceremony in 300 years was conducted on a morning 11 days after we arrived in the Hall of Records with the succession scholars present, and the court assembled and the register opened for the first time in living memory. There were people in that hall who had built 40 years of influence, the managed uncertainty of a succession line, without pleaded compact. They stood in their places in the formal arrangement because the form required it, and because the concordance protocol's legal standing is exactly as unchallengeable as its framers intended, and watched it happen. I stood at the front of it with my scar and my steady hands and my 2 cases of belongings, wearing the most formal thing I owned, which was the dress uniform from my final year on the Kasserine frontier. I had not worn it in 4 years. Fit. The frontier keeps you from going soft. She stood beside me. The record was read. The scholar reading it reached the last line of the concordance seal, the line that closes the protocol and enters the match into the permanent succession register, and read it into the hall in the formal register voice that succession scholars use, which is old and carries the weight of the 300 years that had passed since that line was last spoken. Compact valid. Bloodline confirmed. Sovereign pairing complete. She did not take my hand. We were in front of the court, and she is a queen, and there is a form to these things. But when the scholar closed the register, and the hall began to move with the specific organized noise of a formal proceeding ending, she turned and looked at me with the amber-silver eyes, and the expression that was not quite a smile, but was the thing that lives in the space where a smile could be, and I looked back at her, and that was the recognition, not the scanner, not the ceremony, not the helix rotating on a gray screen above a brown dwarf at 0340. That look, in a hall full of people who had not expected this day, between two people who had not expected each other. I kept the intake log wrong on purpose, because the log says what the log needs to say, and the rest of it belongs to the two of us. But I have told you this much of it, because I think it is worth being said. A scanner in a Class D way station above a brown dwarf, at 0340 on a day that looked like every other day, ran a protocol that had not run in living memory, and it found what 14 months and 47 way stations had not. I do not know what my great-great-grandmother made of the outer ring or what she carried from it. Do not know if she knew what was in her blood, or if it was simply something she lived with, the way we live with most of the things in our blood. Without naming it, without knowing it was there, carrying it faithfully forward through the years and the children and the quiet stations of an ordinary life. I know that she passed it on. I know that it held 3 centuries, 47 way stations, 1 intake desk. It was enough.